Electricast.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Forget the frustration of picking commerce platforms when you switch your business to Shopify, the global commerce platform that supercharges your selling wherever you sell. With Shopify, you'll harness the same intuitive features, trusted apps, and powerful analytics used by the world's leading brands. Sign up today for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/tech, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/tech.
This week on the Deep Leadership Podcast.
Say, well, we did a survey and employees say that they're, 60% engaged. So I don't really care about the survey and how they feel. I mean, I do care, but what I want to know is what are they engaged with? Engaged with creating value for the organization. And the more we get holistic value creation right, the more they lean in and act like the CEO of their own role.
Hi, and welcome to Deep Leadership. I'm your host, John Rennie. Well, I hope all is well with you today, and I'm so glad you found this podcast. The purpose of this podcast is to build a world with better bosses, and we do that by introducing you to the greatest minds working in the leadership space. Our goal is to provide you with practical information to help you along your leadership path, whether you're new to leadership or a seasoned pro. So thank you for listening in. It's an honor to be your host and leadership guide in this journey. Today's episode is brought to you by the Salty Sailor Coffee Company, Cadre of Men, and Pharaoh Skincare. You can find the links to all of our sponsors and all of my books in the show notes. Today we're talking about creating value as a leader, and my guest is Lee Benson. Lee is a successful entrepreneur who is an expert in value creation. Now, when we think about value creation, we often think about it's a financial number, it's a financial value. But Lee tells us it's much more than that. It is the leader who creates the conditions where every employee is working to add value to the organization. So what does that look like and how is it done? Well, Lee breaks it down for us in this important conversation. So, are you ready to dive in? Let's get started.
Welcome to Deep Leadership. Leadership is a people business. That's the philosophy of your podcast host, John Rennie. As a former Cold War submarine officer who spent 20 plus years leading businesses in corporate America before starting his own manufacturing business, he knows that leadership matters. Are you ready for some real-world actionable advice from John as well as his expert guests?
I'm ready.
The show starts right now.
Welcome to the Deep Leadership Podcast. Today I'm joined by Lee Benson. Lee is a value creation expert with over 30 years of experience in the business world. He founded and led 7 companies, including Able Aerospace, which he grew from 2 to 500 employees and 2,000 customers in 60 countries. He sold that business in 2016 for 9 figures, and he is the 2-time best-selling author of Your Most Important Number and Value Creation Kid. And I am excited to have him on the show to talk about value creation and leadership. So, Lee, welcome to the show.
John, it's very good to be here. Thank you.
It is great to meet you, and I'm excited to talk about this subject because it's one we haven't covered in nearly 350 episodes. We haven't covered value creation, so let's talk about it. First of all, how do you become a value creation expert?
Well, I'm not referring to myself as a value creation expert, and my guess is on your show you're talking about lots of things that create a ton of value. But I started really thinking about intentionally creating value in 3 macro buckets quite a while ago. And I think about material value creation, emotional energy value creation, which in my view, positive emotional energy is the scarcest commodity on the planet. And then spiritual value creation, which is about connectedness. And I applied all of that in my businesses, and it made them, pretty darn successful. And, at a high level in a for-profit business, I believe philosophically the CEO's job is to continually and responsibly increase the value of their business. And by proxy, the senior leadership team's job is to do the same thing. So being intentional about value creation and getting it right in all 3 buckets, in my experience, has gotten me 2 to almost 3 times the multiples that my competitors were getting when I exited a couple of companies.
So that's really interesting. I mean, I think that when we think of value creation, a lot of times it's just a financial thing, but you're saying it's more than that.
Yeah, it's a lot more than that. So let's take Able Aerospace as an example. So I sold that in January of 2016. And EBITDA was the most important number, because whatever we sold it for would be a multiple of EBITDA going through. So that's the material side of it. The emotional energy side, in my view, is sort of an X factor for leaders. So I've focused a lot on that, like how they show up, positive energy, good times, and especially bad times, foster an energizing, productive environment to create the most value possible. Huge focus there. And then on the spiritual value creation side, all the things that we did, rituals and events to make sure employees were connected really well with each other, and getting value creation right emotionally and on the connectedness side, really supercharged productive energy in the facility. So when people talk about engagement, I always ask, well, engaged with what and how do you know? And they'll say, well, we did a survey and employees say that they're 60% engaged. So I don't really care about the survey and how they feel. I mean, I do care, but what I want to know is what are they engaged with? Engaged with creating value for the organization. And the more we get holistic value creation right, the more they lean in and act like the CEO of their own role. Like I love going to a department, a team, and they're excited about the value that they're creating. And so we can dig into that, but that's how I think about it.
It's really interesting because I think, when we talk to leaders, they often talk about their goals for the business and what they're working on. And usually it's profitable growth, or it's like you said, engagement or some other feature, but you rarely hear it talked about in terms of value creation from a standpoint of the employees, right? You typically hear about, the business, the numbers, the financial numbers, like you said, EBITDA, right? And but
yeah,
what truly makes sort of like EBITDA is sort of like the end result of the hard work that you do with the employees. And you're saying most of that value is in the emotional energy and the spiritual value you talk about, right? So that's creating a lot of the financial results, right?
Well, it increases productive engagement. It gets everybody in the game a whole lot more. And for the listeners that are running organizations or teams within organizations, do you want all of your team members or employees to be transactionally based? You do this, I pay you, and we go home? Or do you want to be on this developmental journey together where we're all learning to create more and more value? And if it's only about the money and the material side, it's super important. Like if we're not growing the value of the business, that's not really great for all stakeholders. It's really good for them to be able to do it. But on the other two sides, on the emotional and the spiritual side, or connectedness, in the context of a company, it's always about connectedness. Getting those right, get everybody to lean in, as I said earlier, was so much more productive energy, and it just feels better. If it's only about the money and one-dimensional on the three, what I'm calling three macro buckets of value creation, it doesn't feel that great. I know a lot of pretty wealthy, unhappy people that made that their main thing, and they did really well, but they're still unhappy. So apparently that wasn't complete enough, obviously. And so that's why I think about all three buckets. And the more I cultivate it in myself, the more fulfilled I am. I feel better about things. I don't get all wound up if I lose a few $100,000 or even a few $1 million on a deal where I've invested, if I got a lot of value out of the other two buckets while I was doing it. So it's kind of a way of looking at the world. It's a lens. It's a filter, if you will.
That makes a lot of sense. So you've got a book. It's called Your Most Important Number. What is an entrepreneur or a business leader's most important number?
Well, it would be, for the organization, it would be the number that would be reflective of the value of the business. So depending on if you're a startup, established, could be some in your market or industry, could be some multiple of revenue. Most likely it's going to be some multiple of profit, and however you look at that. Could be cash flow going in, but when you think about the most important number for an organization, it's reflective of the value, and it needs to do two things. So above all others, it says you're winning or losing the game and growing, and it has to also drive the majority of the right behaviors. So it's pretty easy at the top of an organization to do it. You also take this and cascade it down to all the departments or functions. Basically every team in an organization. What's the one number that's reflective of the value they were designed to create? Why do you have a marketing team, a sales team, a production team, in operations, what is that one number that will drive the majority of the right behaviors? Is everybody around it? Where did you start? Where are you going? At any point in time, are we on track or not? Hopefully overdriving it. And keep all that in balance with all the other teams in the organization, especially the functions.
Yeah, it makes sense, but how do you get started thinking in that way? Because I think we get distracted as entrepreneurs by shiny metal objects, and we're chasing so many different things. Especially as startup entrepreneurs, when you start off, you're cleaning the bathrooms, you're answering the phones, you're doing all these things, and then as you grow, you have more and more people working for you, and then you're still sort of got your hands in the pot a little bit. So how do we sort of let go of some of the things that we do every day, and then we start thinking in terms of value creation? How do you make that shift?
Well, I think we should be thinking in terms of value creation right from the beginning going forward. How would we value the business today? And what are the things we're doing to increase its value over the first year? And I've started companies from scratch. The early ones had no money. Typical story, almost go out of business, 10 or 15 times the first year. Capital equipment budget of $175. And what can we buy with that? I mean, it's just crazy hard, and we do whatever it takes, but we never lose sight of the direction we're going and the steps that we're taking to continually increase the value of the business. And what I found, John, is that thinking this way uncovers capacity for leaders. It totally does. Because typically there's not more than 3 or 4 things in every company I've ever worked with that create, I would say, 80% plus of all the value. So let's focus on doing those things really, really well before we add a whole bunch of other things and grow the value of the business. So if you're just thinking about that and every team member is focused on things that will improve the most important number for the business, it just makes it a lot clearer. And here's an interesting question for the listeners. Ask your leaders, ask your team members in the organization, how do you create value for this business? And if you get a job description, that says there's a really big opportunity to improve. And in this system that I'm talking about, it's really a quite comprehensive management system. This mind management system that we put together, and I've been working on it for decades and refining it. But as you roll this out in the organization, a leader would say, if you ask that question, how do you create value for the business? Well, this is my team. And let's say, for example, it's marketing. And our most important number is qualified leads. Here's a definition of a qualified lead, which includes, let's say, 20 or 25% conversion. And here's the number of qualified leads that we need. And here's where we're at. We're actually right on track. And here's the best work we're doing to improve the number and quality of qualified leads. That's a pretty darn good answer. And if there's a non-supervisory team member, somebody else on the team not leading it, and you ask them the question, they say, well, I'm on the marketing team. Our most important number is this. This is why it drives the majority of the right behaviors. This is my role. These are the 2 or 3 at most outcomes I'm responsible for to contribute to that. And here's the best work that I'm doing to help the team improve the number and quality of qualified leads. Now, isn't that a much better answer than I run digital marketing?
It is. And what's interesting is that we often, one of the things that we have to do as leaders is sort of, it's about motivating a group of people towards an objective, right? That's what leadership is all about. And I think sometimes we forget about motivation, people, and the goal. Like we work on other things. And I think what I like about what I'm hearing is that you boil it down to the simple tasks or the simple goals of each of the contributing parts of the organization, that they have a clear objective of what their most important thing is to do, right? What do you have to deliver, week over week, month over month, year over year, right? And how does that tie back to the overall business? And if the people in each department understand that, not just the leader but also the employees, then you're more likely to achieve that than if you're just running around doing, making everything a priority. That's one of the things I see a lot with business leaders. When they make everything important, nothing is important. And what it sounds like to me is you're really focusing in on what's really important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How will this work impact the most important number for my team? If I'm within an organization as a senior team leader, how will this work impact our most important number for the company, i.e. increase the value of it? And leadership to me really is creating value with and through others. I mean, it's very similar definition to yours.
Yeah.
And another question I'll ask is, do you have a definition of what it means to be a leader in your organization? So when we hire leaders, what are we telling them other than you run this department and here's some goals, go for it? And I've kind of settled in on, a leader in my organizations, their job is to get results and foster an environment where every team member is intrinsically motivated and empowered to create more value over time. That's my job, to do that. And if you don't get like we were talking about in the beginning, the spiritual piece, the connectedness piece, and the emotional energy piece right, it really hinders a leader's ability to create the environment that I just described. So I think organizations should have a definition of what it means to be a leader. And you could even break it down further and say these are leadership traits that are really important that, drive the right behaviors that cause the most value to be created.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
This episode is brought to you by Cadre of Men. Leadership is a people business, and for men, real growth happens alongside those who challenge and inspire you. Cadre of Men is your force multiplier, helping you achieve more strength, deeper connections, and a stronger sense of purpose. I'm proud to call myself a member of this dynamic group. Cadre of Men is built for men who refuse to settle. With dedicated forums covering fitness, fatherhood, business, and more, we provide the tools and camaraderie to help you thrive. Our weekly Zoom calls dive into tough, real-world topics, often featuring expert guest speakers who will push you to sharpen your skills and mindset. Monthly meetups include intense hikes and hands-on building sessions where you forge bonds through shared challenges. From fitness and finance challenges to mastering public speaking, Cadre of Men delivers actionable curriculum in leadership, business, and personal growth. If you're ready to step up, push past your comfort zone, and lead by example, Cadre of Men is for you. Inside the Cadre, we grow together, lead together, and rise together. Visit cadreofmen.com to learn more and take the first step toward becoming your best self. This episode is brought to you by Pharaoh Skincare. I would have never imagined I'd be talking about skincare, but this stuff is truly amazing. Pharaoh is revolutionizing skincare by replacing harmful chemicals with natural ingredients sourced from regenerative farms. Now, weightlifting is tough on the hands, and Pharaoh's Epic Dermis is the best product I've ever used to get my callous hands back to normal and stay in the game. Now I use it every day. Pharaoh also works to reduce fine lines, wrinkles, and improve overall skin health. As Pharaoh CEO Charles Mayfield likes to say, a little Pharaoh goes a long way. Deep Leadership Podcast listeners can save 15% off all of their products by using the code DEEP at checkout. So check them out at pharaoh.life. That's FARROW.life. This episode is brought to you by the Salty Sailor Coffee Company, the official coffee of the Deep Leadership Podcast. Salty Sailor is a veteran-owned coffee brand on a mission to deliver premium, fresh roasted coffee while making a positive impact in the world. Their motto is drink coffee and do good, which reflects their commitment to making amazing coffee and actively supporting the military community. 10% of every order goes to the Navy Marine Corps Relief Society, an organization dedicated to helping sailors, Marines, and their families in times of need. All our listeners get 10% off every order of their amazing coffee by using the discount code DEEP at checkout. So check them out at saltysailorcoffee.com.
Yeah, that I really like what you're saying there. And am I correct to say that a lot of what you're talking about is cultural? Like you're creating a culture, a value creation culture. Am I going too far to say that? Because it sounds, these are cultural things you're talking about: connectedness, focus, an objective, everybody working together towards an objective. It sounds cultural to me.
Yeah, in my book, I talk about a simple definition of culture, what we agree to do and how things get done. So you're 100% right. You could simplify it even further and say culture is basically made up of the attitudes and behaviors that cause the most value to be created. So if we create, as leaders, we create alignment tools like, could be values, behaviors, mission, vision, et cetera. how are we creating those? And are we designing them to create the most value? And I always think that it should be designed to create the most value, because everything we do should be done at least with the intent of measurably improving things. We're not always right in our assumptions when we do something, but at least with that intent. And I started, back in the late 90s when I would come up with a set of behaviors to drive this culture that we're talking about. I just simply said, hey, how do we create the conditions where 50% or more of our team members are behaving, performing, and leading as good or better than the top 10% at our strongest, most admired competitors? If we can do that, nobody will ever beat us. So how do we do that? And I remember when I first did this, I only had 70 employees, and I surveyed them, and I said, this is what I'm trying to accomplish. This will be great for all of us. Need your help. From your view, please write down the observable behaviors of the best performing team members you've ever worked with on their best days. And I had 68 team members respond with a list of all these behaviors. And before that, we had values, which didn't mean much. It was really expensive wallpaper. The first one was integrity. Like, how are you applying integrity to make us measurably better? I got 10 kind of crazy answers. Okay, missed on that one. But now that we went to behaviors, it was high-performing team members throughout Able Aerospace or Able Engineering at that time do what they say they will, or they're fully engaged and participate within the team. They treat company resources as their own. They're respectful, honest, and straightforward. They present and pursue permanent solutions as opposed to dwelling on problems. I'll remember these until I'm 95 or older, because we actually sunk our teeth into them and applied them to create more value as an organization. And back then, I even asked every team member every 6 months for each of our alignment tools, behaviors, mission, vision, come up with one example of how you're applying it to make us measurably better, improving profitability, cash flow, or customer experience, internal or external.
Wow. Yeah. So see, listening to you talk about it, this is a very intentional thing on the part of the leader. You have to be able to do this. You have to do this with the intention that you're going to make this a part of your company, right? It's very focused, and it's very much going to be embedded in the culture once you move in this direction. Is that what what's what it sounds like to me?
Yeah, 100%. And the clearer we are around this, the more, the less chaos, the less confusion, the better alignment, and it frees up capacity, and it stops us from doing things that don't really matter. And the way I started thinking about this, and I included in the book as well, there's 3 ways that leaders kind of show up, or 3 categories to me. There's as a leader, so what are the leadership traits and attitudes, behaviors, all of that. And then the second category, I called it foundational readiness. So at any point in time, are you ready to grow at least 20%? And are you foundationally ready for that? And it's everything that goes with it. It could be equipment, people, training, cross-training, all of it. And then the third category is your sort of management operating system. So what are the activities that you do regularly to cause the most value to be created? So there's meetings, training, all kinds of things in a management operating system that you sustain, consistently with high discipline. And what I did early on around this is I would take those 3 categories, and I would have sort of sub-elements of each one of them. And I would rank every leader in the organization red, green, or yellow in each. And I had a big board that I put up. And before I did it, there's some leaders getting great results, others not so great, and some lackluster. Once I put it up, no surprise, the leaders consistently getting good results were green across the board for the most part, always opportunities to improve. And the ones that didn't were more red, a lot of yellow in the middle. But lo and behold, within 90 days, almost everybody's green and the company's growing faster. Mm-hmm. And it laid it out there for everyone. And I think part of this value creation culture we're talking about, we want to create the conditions where everybody's focused on creating more value. We have this value creation engine, this company that we have, this machine that we're moving forward, and we're not worried about how we're perceived. We want really good feedback so we can create more value. I used to love listening to some of the leaders just passionately saying, this is what we have to do. This is the only way to do this thing. And then another leader says, I hear you, and this will create 20% more value than what you're talking about. And the leader that was passionately going after this way just shifted on a dime and said, wow, that's amazing. Let's go do that. Like, everybody's working together to create the value. not sitting around worried about hurting somebody's feelings, along those lines, if you will. So you said it earlier, but it's super intentional. I think our goal, all of us as leaders of organizations, is to create a value creation culture. And then what does that look like? How do you define it? And it's not a set it and forget it. It's a journey with no end to what's possible, and everybody needs to be comfortable with that journey.
Does it also translate to the customer? Because we haven't really talked about that, but in terms of the value you're creating for the customer, is that also tie into that? In other words, we start the company thinking that we're adding this value to the customer, but there's more value we could be adding, or there's a different. And so, as part of this journey, is it intentionally looking at what you supply to the market, whether it's services or products, and that value that you're adding to the customers? Is that a part of it? Because we haven't really talked about the customer side of it, but a lot of times you hear value creation is like we create a certain amount of value for our customers or our clients, depending on the business model. But is that a piece of it as well?
Well, it has to be, and there's no way you can continually increase the value of an organization responsibly over time without making sure that the customers want more and more of what we have. I just added an 8th chapter to the book, Your Most Important Number, and it'll come out probably in about 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks. And the chapter is all around why sometimes CEOs fail, and does your team even understand? Because a company can pick an operating methodology. It could be OKRs, 40X, EOS, scaling up. There's so many out there. I've got my mind management system that they can dig into. I think mine's best because it focuses on value creation, not activities. You don't have to learn a new language going through around it. But but let me say it this way. Where they fail, there's 4 areas. There's the business model, in my experience, the business model, strategy, the value of your products and services, and culture. And I think it's important for every leader to be connected to those 4 things. So on the business model side, what is your pricing? How do you do that? How do you get it right? What are all the expenses in your approaches for delivering on this product or service? What's the profit today and the short history of it, and what's the potential for future profit? And now, how can every single leader get fully engaged as it relates to them in following and continually improving the business model and the impact on the business? So I think some of the best work we can do as CEOs is nudge leaders when they're outside the business model back there so they're making all the decisions around it. Now I move over to strategy, and rather than strategy being something that I know it sounds easy. Oh, everybody knows what a strategy is, really, because when you ask people, it feels kind of heady to them, like strategy. Oh, I'm not sure I can do that. And I get strategy decks from mid-sized up to really large companies, and they have over 100 strategic initiatives, and really only a couple of them fit my definition of a strategic initiative, which is, strategy is nothing more than approaches to increasing the value of a business. That's it. So when I ask that question of senior teams, what can we do to increase the value of the business? Instantly they go to where they need to go, rather than we're here to set strategy. Like what I said works so much better than we're here to set strategy. So when I get 100 strategic initiatives, if there's 20, they usually all fit right into the 3 or 4 areas that create 80% plus of the value for the business. So we put them there. And then your point about value that the customers are receiving, most companies I talk to like their stuff a whole lot more than their customers do. Doesn't mean the customers don't. They just think a lot more of it. So every leader has to be fully connected, in my opinion, to what the customers really perceive we have, and doing their best to continually improve the perceived value improve experience, product, all that at a lowering relative cost over time. Everybody should be connected to that. All the leaders should be. And whatever the strategy is, just to finish that thought, cascade it out to everybody appropriately to do their part in improving or increasing the value of the business. And then on the culture side, everybody needs to understand, I think, the attitudes and behaviors that drive the most value to be created. And we're all aligned to that, and we're doing it, and we manage to it. It's a great way to say, wow, you really lived it and it created this value, or you didn't and it missed this opportunity over here. Let's keep going. So I know that was a lot, but those 4 areas are really important. I call it nudging. So if you're constantly developing your leadership team, you should be, I think, nudging your leaders around the business model, strategy, the way I described it, and the actual value of the product and services or services that you have, and the culture piece.
That makes so much sense. Yeah. And I think it boils it down to some simple things you can work on that are going to help your organization be better versus, like you said, chasing, 100 initiatives, which are essentially, a lot of them are goals. They're not necessarily strategic in nature. So yeah, I love that. And I love the idea of
Yeah, John, a lot of those other things. I was going to say a lot of the other things. So you've got a few strategic initiatives that will really increase the value of the business. The rest of them I put into a category called "Please do your job."
Yeah,
because that's really what they are. It's not. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, I think what you're saying is critical, which is, boil it down to a few key things that you're working on, because we're busy and our people are busy. And if you have too many things you're working on, nothing gets done. So I love the idea. And I think that what I love is you say, what's strategic? Well, what's going to add the most value, right? And when you boil it down to that, it makes it simple. So it makes it simple to understand. So, we've got a lot of business leaders, entrepreneurs that are new entrepreneurs, or maybe new business leaders. What advice would you give them, starting off their leadership journey? What are some things they should think about, especially in this light of this value creation concept?
So in particular, are you asking for advice for new entrepreneurs starting a business?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Well, I think in that category, where are you going to create more value than what's available today? Rarely is it some brand new thing. It's cool when it is, but that's super rare. Usually, it could be as simple as a coffee shop. I want to open up a business where we serve coffee. Okay, well, why are they going to choose you over everybody else? And it's just relentlessly focusing on that. So the goal is to, again, increase the value of your business over time, but continually improve the experience, whatever it is, at a lowering relative cost over time. And it would be really helpful to think about those 4 categories. The business model essentially, and a lot don't spend much time on the business model. How are we going to price? What is your pricing policy? My policy has always been, let's charge as much as we possibly can and still be the best value alternative and encourage future business. Don't leave anything on the table. And if it costs, $500 to do something, and you want to charge $600, but everybody else charges $400, it doesn't matter what it costs you to do it. Like, what it costs to provide the product or service has nothing to do with what you charge, what the ideal price is out in the marketplace. So once you identify that, now how do we do it at a lowering relative cost over time? So think about those 4 areas: the model, the culture, strategy, and the actual value, and keep building on that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think you touched on something just in the early stage. You said, why would people go to your coffee shop as opposed to everybody else's, right? I understand you have a podcast as well that is getting going. You started off this year. Tell us a little bit about your podcast.
Yeah, thank you for asking. My podcast title is Show Your Value, The Art of Value Creation. And I've started 8 companies from scratch. I've had, one exit well into 9 figures, and I had 1 8 and 1 7-figure exit before that. Still operate a couple of companies, work with lots of businesses. My whole sort of mission or purpose in life right now is driving these holistic value creation behaviors out into the world. So on the podcast, I'm talking about creating value in all 3 buckets. And I'm talking with a lot of folks that have run some, pretty big companies, and some folks that went from, struggling startups to, today, a couple $1 billion in sales, like Brian Smith with UGG brands, or UGG boots, the sheepskin boots from Australia. It was a lot of years before he got to even $1 million a year in sales. Yeah, when he sold it in the early 90s, it was a nice exit for him. But fast forward, went on to do over today like $2+ billion in annual sales. So it's like this journey, and all the way through. How did you think about value creation? So anybody listening to the podcast, Just search for my name, Lee Benson, Show Your Value, and you'll find the podcast and lots of amazing speakers in there.
Fantastic. Well, we're going to put links in the show notes for that resource as well. Lee, what final message would you like to leave with our listeners?
Yeah, I think to summarize, think about value creation differently. Like really look at it holistically, the material, the emotional energy, and the connectedness side on the spiritual side. Some people are deeply religious, others are not, but being connected is important to everyone, and especially your team members. Be on a developmental journey with your team, not a transactional journey, and you have a much, much larger value creation potential when you do that.
I love it. Such great advice. So, Lee, how can our listeners find out more about you, your books, and all your services?
Yeah, I recommend going to our website, which is etw.com. The company is Execute to Win, but yeah, go to etw.com. We have lots of free resources. You can find my book there or in one of 40,000 different channels, Amazon, et cetera. In the audio book for Your Most Important Number, I do recorded interviews after every chapter for more insight, so that may be something to consider.
Nice.
And I also have a number of CEO mastermind groups. I call them Execute Masterminds. And it's all about CEOs continually and responsibly increasing the value of their business. They're smaller groups, so at least every 2 months at a minimum, we do a deep dive on everybody's business. And the results are fantastic. So you can learn all about that when you go to the website, etw.com.
Fantastic. We're going to put links in the show notes for that and all of Lee's resources. And again, if you go to that website, there's some free things that you can get to. And if you want to learn more about value creation, you're going to reach out to Lee on that website, and he's going to give you more information. Lee, this has been fantastic. I think you've given us something to think about with respect to value creation that is not just the financial numbers, but it's all about how do we build a culture that's going to be where everybody's pulling in the same direction to create value for the business, for the customers, and for each other. So you're connecting the people, and you're working towards, like you said, not just money, but the satisfaction of working together on a team that's getting big things done in the world. And I think we all want to be on a team like that. And I think that's what's powerful about the message that you told us today is, how do you build an organization like that, a culture like that? You got to know your most important number. You got to follow this mindset, this value creation mindset. Lee, thanks for coming on the show, and thanks for sharing this important message.
John, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you again. Well, that is it for today. Thank you for listening to Deep Leadership. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and share so we can continue to build a world with better bosses. Until next time, this is John Rennie saying take care and lead well.
Thank you for listening to Deep Leadership.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you for all you do.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. For more information and updates, please visit our website at www.deepleadershippodcast.com or johnsrennie.com. Until next time, take care.
Have you ever wondered what actually happens in Congress every day? Stay informed on Capitol Hill's daily happenings with a concise, factual summary of the Senate and House of Representatives' activities from the previous session, free from bias, on the Congressional Record Daily Digest podcast. Subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and discover the process from the heart of U.S. politics. The Congressional Record Daily Digest, an Electricast production.
Electricast.
Everyone has heard about the U.S. space program, but what is actually going on at NASA? Get the real story in 4 minutes or less with the NASA Daily Podcast from Electricast. Join astronauts and researchers as they conduct groundbreaking experiments, work on the International Space Station, and reach for the stars. NASA Daily, your cosmic update.
Electricast.